Alright, I'm going to move on to a bass now. So what I'm going to do with this is create it out of two instruments again. So I'll bring in an instrument rack. And the first instrument I'm going to use is just going to be dedicated to the deep low end. It'll be made out of a sine wave. And the second instrument will be dedicated to creating this at a high textural end of the bass. There's a few instruments you can use for this deep sub bass. Basically, you just want a nice, clean, deep sine wave. So you've got to pick your synths a bit, find one that's got the best. But I like to use, this is a patch I created myself. It's just recorded samples from my MS-2000 of just a pure sine wave. But yeah, there's a lot of synths you can use. The operator is good for this as well, but I like this. So we're just going to start by punching in some notes and just trying to create our pattern and focusing on the sub bass to begin with. So we've got our kicks. Let's go down to G0. I quite like G0. So that sounds like a nice, wee, easy pattern. Good place to start with. Yeah, but just to be a little bit more techno, let's throw in a groove. So what do we got? Nice swing, 1655. That'll be good. So we'll go into our groove pool. And let's just take the amount down a bit, somewhere there. We're going to apply this to our bass patch. Our bass. Alright, so let's just craft this a little nicely. We'll give it a bit more punch to begin with, so we'll do this by turning on the pitch envelope and put that to about 12 semitones above. So that means, you can hear it now, the note is starting 12 semitones above that which you put in the clip, and it's just swooping down from the envelope, but we'll just shorten this decay. Just makes it a lot more punchy, which is nice. And we'll set the level where we want this. Yeah, that'll do for now. It's kind of hard to set it at this point without hearing the other instruments in there. So we'll chuck in some compression. Actually, let's grab... No, this will do, just a compressor. So this is just going to try and get that sub bass as punchy and as sharp as possible. Turn the ratio down, we'll set the threshold. Again, this is the output of this sub bass is pretty uniform, so we'll just hit that tip. Yeah, the lower you put your threshold just means the more of the lower volume, lower levels of the signal will be pumped up, and that's not necessarily the best thing. For this, we just want to get that nice snappy punch. Yeah. I usually like to use a good bit of ratio on the bass. Cool. That's a nice... Yep. Now you can probably hear a bit of distortion. It's not sounding too great at the moment, so we need to play with the attack and the release. That's good. Cool. Yeah, let's roll with that. Sweet, so now that bass is sounding nice, we can bring in another instrument. do the high textural end, so we'll bring in this one operator, and we'll bring in an EQ8. So we're going to chop off the bottom end because we've got our sub bass doing that. Let's try about there. So let's just have a play and see what nice sounds we can get. So just to be clear about what we're doing, so I've got this operator set so that it's all these oscillators are feeding into the next oscillator down the list and just applying some FM modulation. So oscillator B is not coming out to the audio output, its output is being used to modulate the pitch of A, but because it's done just like an LFO would do when you're modulating the pitch of an oscillator with an LFO, but instead we're using an audio frequency oscillator. Yeah, if you want to know a little more about FM synthesis, there's a lot of good articles on the internet, but yeah, essentially all we're doing is modulating the pitch of A with the oscillator of B, but because it's at an audio frequency as opposed to a lower frequency, the result is quite different. But let's just do a quick example so you can hear. So I've taken it off fixed, so now the pitch of B is being adjusted solely by this. So you can hear that the beating of the LFO, sorry, of the oscillator modulating the pitch. But as we put it up, the effect is quite different than an LFO. So that's what we're doing. But anyway, back on track. So that sounds okay. With the filter, bit of envelope. Let's just make this a bit sharper. Give it some spread. And let's just play around with some different waveforms. Sounds better. Get a nice balance. Cool. So that's a good start. Now I'm going to chuck another compressor over there, just for some light compression, not too much. That'll do. Just another good rule of thumb when you're doing compression and you're figuring out your attack and your release, you're not quite sure what to use. Generally the rule of thumb I go by is the bassier the sound you're compressing, the more attack and release you sort of need to make it transparent. And again, if it's a longer sustained sound, a longer release is good. If it's a punchier sound, a lot shorter, then a shorter release is good. But because there's not a lot of bass in the sound, we've chopped it out. We're using a bit quicker release and attack than we did with the sub bass, which you can see is a bit longer. Yeah. So we'll just gain it correctly. Sweet. So there's our kick and our bass done. So these two instruments here more or less define where the level of bass in your track sits. So everything else you make after this sits relative to these two instruments regarding bass.